Thank you. So if you could just kind of keep your finger in Hosea 11 while you're also just looking on at chapter 3, I encourage you to keep your Bibles open and follow along with me as we go through our text for this morning. We've finished up Ephesians, so we're finally on to a new series. And as we go through just this season of Advent and just the lead up to Christmas, I wanted to just visit some of those places in the Old Testament, the Old Testament, where God really just prophetically predicts who the Messiah will be, and just anticipate along with them. So I wanted to start this morning with just a hypothetical. If you could just imagine with me for a moment. Imagine you get married. This is a totally hypothetical scenario. The story I'm about to tell you has absolutely nothing to do with my wife, so please don't make any kind of character associations there at all. But just imagine for a minute you get married, and you get married to the girl of your dreams. She's just everything that you ever wanted. She's really beautiful and really smart and just laughs at all of your corny jokes. And, maybe she's a little bit rough around the edges, right? She's got a couple of tattoos that maybe your mom wouldn't approve of. She used to maybe have a little bit of a drug problem back in college. Was a little bit wild, but you just love her so much that you look past all of those things. It's not a problem for you. And so you date for a little while, you get married, and everything is going great, and you love her, and you provide for her, and you care for her, and you're living together, and everything's great. And then one day, you come home from work, and there's a couple, half-empty glasses on the table. You're like, well, that's kind of weird. And then you go upstairs, and there's just, some clothing on the floor, and you can't believe it when you walk into the bedroom, but there's another man in your bed, and it's obviously not you. Somehow you get past that event, you somehow deal with it. There's lots of promises that, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, it'll never happen again, it was this big mistake. And you start to go to some marriage counseling. But the whole time, your wife is just kind of half-heartedly engaged. She's not really in it. She's not really invested. You're seriously pouring out everything you've got into saving this marriage, but she just seems cold and distant when you say that you still love her. She doesn't really seem to want to work on it at all. And it turns out that this is not just a one-time event. It happens again. You start to see weird charges on your credit card, and it seems like she's always coming up with some lame excuse that doesn't really add up. Trust starts to evaporate from your relationship. You don't know who you married anymore. One night you follow her into town, and she's supposed to be going to a business meeting, but you see her walk into a bar with yet another man, and it just turns out that she's just serial cheating on you over and over. So you still want to try to make this work. You go the tough love route. You cut up all of her credit cards. You take her off as a authorized user, so she's not allowed to use any of that without you knowing. She always just finds ways around it. One night, you get a call late at night when you're expecting her to come home, and you actually have to go down to the police station and bail your wife out of jail. She's been caught soliciting. Your wife is so eager to stray. She's so caught up in that cycle, that life, the thrill, that she's actually sunk so low she's become a prostitute. So you go down to the bail bond stuff, you sell a few guitars, a few other just things that you had around the house, and you have to bail your own wife out of the county jail just to bring her home. On top of that, she's pregnant, apparently. You have no idea if it's your kid or not. The anniversary gift that she got you is actually just a watch that she stole from her lover. She wasn't thinking about you at all. Still, through all of that, you love your wife so much that you just want her to come home. You are willing still, amazingly, to do whatever it takes. This story that I just told, it sounds like an HBO special more than it sounds like something that should be in the Bible, but that is exactly, I modernized it a little bit, but that is the story of the book of Hosea. And it's the story of God and his people. So as we walk through Advent, as we kind of go through this series together this month, I want us to walk through this Old Testament prophetic vision of Jesus, and we want to anticipate, along with the saints from thousands of years ago, with what the coming of the Messiah would be like, as we anticipate the celebration of his birth at the end of the month. And so our first stop is this book of Hosea. And if you've read the Old Testament at all, you know that the prophets are kind of strange people. They're commanded by God to do a lot of weird things. Ezekiel had to lie on his side, tied up for over a year. Jeremiah had to physically walk around Jerusalem wearing a wooden, cow yoke on his neck, that you use to yoke cow together for plowing. God's people are just not listening to the message that God has to say. And so he's not afraid to get creative in how he tries to communicate. And he's not afraid to do sometimes outlandish things to grab our attention. If you're called by God to be his messenger, if you're a prophet, you know that some interesting things are in store, to say the least. And yet for the life of Hosea, it's not just an isolated activity. It's not just lay on your side for a year. It's not just wear a yoke for a week and maybe people will look at you a little bit strangely. But when God calls Hosea to be his prophet, it is your entire life is going to be one giant object lesson. You are actually going to live out the message that I'm trying to tell my people. And you are going to be a living metaphor. We don't really get any biographical background information about Hosea, no introduction to who he is as a man. The book of Hosea starts out in chapter 1 with a wedding. It starts with a command. God says, go marry a professional prostitute. Actually, the word that the Bible uses is much less polite. It basically translates to marry a whore. It's not a nice word, but it's intentionally used to be shocking. Marry very bluntly, a promiscuous woman. And Hosea, when he's hearing this command from God, he would have been just as shocked as we are. It's very surprising that the holy God would command his prophet to marry a prostitute. But God is very direct about the message. You don't have to dig far into the allegory to figure out what he's talking about. He's saying, I have perfectly loved my people, and they have done nothing but act like a spiritual whore. They've turned away again and again. Marriage is, in the Bible, one of those big overarching metaphors that God keeps coming back to again and again. In many places throughout Scripture, God describes himself as a faithful and loving husband and his people as an unfaithful bride. And so the whole point is that just as a husband and a wife make vows in front of many witnesses and publicly swear their undivided devotion to each other, right? You say things like, forsaking all others, I'll keep myself only for you as long as we both shall live. I vow to love you and serve you in sickness and in health, plenty and in want. Well, why do you do such a thing? Why do you make those vows? It's not usually cold and calculating. It's not, well, if I make these vows, I've set myself up for the sugar mama. I'm not going to have to worry about money. It's not this business transaction. It's not this calculating thing. You don't weigh the pros and the cons. You make those vows because you genuinely love the other person. Hopefully, right? The devotion that comes out in those vows is natural. It's easy. And so, in the same way that God in the Bible makes this covenant with Abraham and with Jacob and with Moses and with David and ultimately with his whole people to be their God and to live among them and to care for them, At the same time, he requires faithfulness in return. And so we read in the Bible that he swears by himself, and God makes this covenant or this oath, this vow to his people. Why? Because he loves them. Because he literally is love. Jeremiah 31:3, we read, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, I've continued my faithfulness to you. And yet, God's people are wayward from the very start. It seems like we just can't get it together at all. How many times have you experienced that? Just lying promises to God when you know deep down that you have no real intention of changing. Constant protestations of renewed devotion and, yeah, I'm going to be better this time. I'm going to stop doing that thing, but there's no real intention to reform our ways behind it. God is a betrayed lover, just like in that story that I started with, and he's heartbroken. Every time that we sin, every time we break God's law, it's not that you just did something wrong on a checklist of wrong things, but every single time that we worship other gods, every time that we make anything else in our life our ultimate thing so that we live for it, find our worth and value and hope and significance and identity in it, so that we sacrifice for it, whether it's money or sex or relationships, success, power, love, respect, reputation, fill in the blank. Anything other than simply to get more of God for himself, we're breaking our wedding vows and we're cheating on God. And it breaks his heart. Sin is called in the Bible transgression because we've transgressed, or another word is we've trespassed. You know, you think about like those signs that say no trespassing. It means there's a boundary line that you're not allowed to cross. The property on the other side of that belongs to someone else. We have unlawfully crossed the boundaries of the covenant. To mix metaphors slightly, we've crossed over, we've trespassed onto foreign ground where we don't belong. And God is ultimately the offended party every single time. So, as we go through the book of Hosea, he obeys God's command. He marries this woman with a really bad reputation, and it goes about as well as you would expect that kind of arrangement to go. By the time we get to where we started our passage today, the beginning of chapter 3, Hosea's wife, Gomer, has been doing exactly what she's accustomed to doing. She can't seem to change her way of life in spite of all of Hosea's pleading. And in chapter 3, it actually gets her in a lot of trouble. It seems like Gomer's regular side guy has basically become her pimp. It's possible that there's like a debt slavery situation going, that she owed somebody money and became a slave in that way. That was not uncommon in the ancient world. It's not super clear on the details, but what is clear from our passage in verse 2 is that Hosea actually has to go and buy back his own wife. He has to physically pay money to another man simply for his wife to come home. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethek of barley. Think about how that feels. How humiliating, how embarrassing, how painful to have to buy your own wife back because she got herself in trouble. But let's also dig into Gomer a little bit and to her psychology, because ultimately she is designed to be this super uncomfortable snapshot of ourselves. When we look at Gomer and feel really uncomfortable, we're looking in the mirror. Verse 2 says, my people turn to other gods and they love cakes of raisins. What? It's kind of weird. Now, that's what it says. It says she loves cakes of raisins. Down in chapter 11, verse 7, it says their hearts are bent on turning away. This is a description of God's people. And we might find it strange in the particulars, right? Not too many of us are that crazy about raisins, but that's exactly the point. Let's look at the exchange that's happening here. Gomer is not trading up. God's people are not trading up in any way. You don't turn away from the living and true God and find something better anywhere. It's just not possible. God is saying, I am Yahweh. I raised you. I led you through the desert. I fed you. I protected you. I've kept all of my promises. On top of that, I gave you this land that you're living in, where there's cities that you didn't build and vineyards that you didn't plant, and you're enjoying all of these blessings that you didn't have to work for. And if that were not enough, I would have given you even more. And you're like, but those Baal worshipers over there, they get to eat raisin cakes. And, God, I really like raisins. So yeah, peace. It doesn't make any sense. It's not rational, but sin is not rational. Think about the foolishness of this kind of idolatry. It's Yahweh gave us children. Yahweh made our land produce fruit and raised up all the food that we're eating and all the money that we have. But just to make sure, let's double down. Cause, Baal, he's the local fertility god, and raisins are biblically a sign of how he's able to bless us, right? In the Bible, grapes or raisins or wine or anything in that kind of category of that plant it's a symbol of fertility, right? When things are going well, when the land is producing a lot of fruit, you have a lot of wine. And so raisin cakes in this verse are a symbol of the fertility that Baal is able to give. In other words, the Israelites are hedging their bets. It's ultimately a lack of faith. Behind saying we love the sacred raisin cakes is really, well, maybe God isn't trustworthy in every possible situation. So I need this kind of extra insurance on the side. And to us reading it, it's obviously foolishness, and yet even though we know that, we also turn away again and again and again. So the question for us is, what gives? Because you do this too. You know that God is infinitely worthy of your undivided trust, and yet you pursue other things. You know that pornography is not going to satisfy your lust. It's just going to fuel this insatiable hunger that's always going to grow deeper and deeper, and it's going to degrade you, and it's going to destroy your mind from the inside out and actually change your brain chemistry to where you're not able to even enjoy actual human relationships ultimately, and you're going to just spiral down into this cycle of misery and guilt and shame. But hey, raisin cakes. A few seconds of pleasure is worth it. You know in the bottom of your heart that even if you were to land that perfect boyfriend, that perfect girlfriend, you're still not going to be fulfilled in the way that you're looking for, because ultimately the problem is in you. That your insecurity, your personality, all of that stuff, that's not going to be fixed no matter who you're with. It doesn't matter if you're with the perfect person. That is not going to change who you are. And actually, you're going to take all of that toxic loneliness into the relationship. It's not a magic bullet for your emotional health. But raisin cakes look really good. You know that no amount of cash, no amount of stuff is ultimately ever going to satisfy you. It's always going to be just a little bit more. And yet you still live and sacrifice and strive and pour out your life for the ultimate goal of just a little bit more. Because raisin cakes. Because we are all bent on turning away, as chapter 4, verse 7 tells us. There is an addictive nature to sin that doesn't make any rational sense. I don't know how many of you have ever struggled with addictions. Did a lot of drugs in high school. I smoked for about 11 years. Probably took like 50 tries to finally quit. Addictions are tough. Gomer, in these verses, she doesn't change because she can't change, because she won't change. It doesn't mean that she's not responsible for changing. Clearly that's not the case from our text. There's a sense in which she chooses this, and we can't avoid that. But so far, in the verses we've read, nothing has worked. Nothing is actually getting to that heart level and changing her heart. Researchers are, just now starting to really begin to explore addiction and then science behind it. And they're recognizing that there's a lot of social dynamics to addiction. That it's more than just dopamine dependence in the brain. I mean, think about it. It kind of makes sense, because if it was just purely a chemical thing, then everyone would be addicted the first time they do any kind of drug, and no one would ever be able to get over an addiction. It's more complicated than that. There are a lot of factors that go into the addictive brain and the addictive personality. Usually there's a lot of hurt in the background for the kinds of people that are easily addicted. And that's what we see in these verses. Gomer craves her other lovers. She craves the reward that she thinks she gets from them. Just like with any drug, you crave the reward because it feels good. You think it's taking you away from some felt pain. All of this then gets reinforced. It gets strengthened over time as you indulge it again and again. And it isolates you. It sucks you in deeper and deeper. It becomes this compulsion, something that you can't get away from. Something inside of you gets broken and you get stuck in this cycle. It literally becomes, in this perverted, twisted way, your source of life. And until you replace that reward system, until you break the cycle, maybe you can abstain from whatever it is for a short amount of time, but ultimately you are always going to relapse. You will never have lasting change. You need to remove the chaos that drives the person to escape in drugs or alcohol or sex or whatever it is, any sin. Put it in there. It doesn't have to be just the flashy ones. You need to begin to provide the relationships, the care, the comfort, the unconditional favor, the grace that they're currently deriving from that drug or that sin. Back during the Vietnam War, they did studies on this. There were thousands and thousands of soldiers in Vietnam who, because of the stress and just the horror of being in jungle warfare, became heroin users. And not just a little, there was a lot of heroin available in Vietnam and really pure. So we're talking about these soldiers out in the jungle who are hardcore heroin users. And what they found strange is, heroin is one of the toughest drugs to beat. There's horrible withdrawal symptoms. They have to usually put you under close medical watch because people have died from the withdrawal of heroin. It's really, really difficult. And yet, these soldiers who started using heroin in Vietnam because of the horrors of the warfare, they came home to the United States, and what they saw is they were able to stop, to completely kick the habit like nothing ever happened. And it was really strange. How is this heroin that's so difficult to get off of, how can they just come home to their families, to normalcy, and get rid of it as if they ever used? Well, it's because the horrors of warfare, the thing that was actually driving them to it, was taken away, and the normalcy, the relationships, the love that they were deriving from the heroin, or really numbing themselves to the lack of it, was completely changed. Their circumstances were completely reversed, and so they didn't need it anymore. And in the same way, until we find our ultimate value in the gospel of Jesus Christ, until he becomes our ultimate lover, and we really taste that he's able to give us something that is truly better than anything else that we could ever spend our lives on, we will never give up our raisin cakes. And we will never return to our husband. We can't. We're addicted. We're slaves to the sin that we serve. And it breaks God's heart. So what's the way forward? What's the response in these verses? Well, the response on God's part is twofold. First of all, we saw with Hosea, there's some tough love. Chapter 4, verse 3 and 4 says, "You must dwell as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore or belong to another man. So I will also be to you. For the children of Israel shall dwell many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, ephod or household gods." He's talking about exile. And in Gomer's case, Hosea and Gomer, not Homer Simpson. Hosea tries to restrain Gomer with all of these external measures. He's trying to pen her in, remove the occasions, remove the opportunity for straying. If the problem here specifically is sexual sin, well, we're going to have this period of total abstinence. You're going to live with me, but I will not give you to another man. And we will also not be together in that way. There's kind of a reset here. There's discipline. And yet even that doesn't seem to really work. This is definitely a period of major reform, right? Hosea is saying, stay here. Live with me. I am not going to treat you like the prostitute that you seem to be acting like. I'm not gonna sell you to somebody else. I'm not gonna let that be your identity. And since you're so focused on using your sexuality in a sinful way, I'm not even gonna sleep with you as your husband. There's this period of total abstinence. It's a totally new lifestyle for her. She's basically going cold turkey here. I don't know if you've ever tried to quit something cold turkey. It's really tough. God's ways of restraining our wandering, of holding us back from the sin that we long for, might seem severe at times, but they're with our good in mind. And yet still, there is no real change. There's no ultimate heart change in Gomer, at least not yet. And so there's a second response from Hosea and ultimately from the Lord. And it's a response that I think we can understand really well. It's frustration and anger. Now remember, this is God we're talking about. So this is not in any way the kind of petty, sin-tainted human anger that we're used to. But this is justified anger towards Israel's many and repeated sins. This is a guilty verdict. And it brings invasion and exile. There is corrective discipline, but there's also punishment here in these verses. And corrective discipline and punitive discipline are not mutually exclusive. And so he says Israel is going to go away into exile. Chapter 11, 5 and 6 uses colorful language. They're not going to return to Egypt, but Assyria will be their king. I'm going to give them a new master, and they're going to serve the king of Assyria because they've refused to return to me. The sword will rage against their cities and consume the bars of their gates and devour them because of their counsels. I will not raise them up at all. There's punishment for sin. And it's real. And really, isn't this kind of outrage on God's part, isn't it understandable when you get down to it? Think about the jealousy at this kind of betrayal. It makes sense. Israel deserves, in the context of this metaphor, Israel deserves completely to be divorced and forgotten. We've somewhere along the way, I think, picked up this idea that somehow God's love ought to just completely erase his wrath entirely. That just because he's patient and forgiving, he ought to somehow let us off the hook for sin. We've swallowed this wishy-washy kind of Disney-fied version of what love is, but really isn't genuine love always jealous love? It has to be, or it's not really love. C.S. Lewis in chapter 5 of Mere Christianity says, see, the trouble is that one part of you, talking about how we feel about God's jealous love, one part of you is on his side and really agrees with his disapproval of human greed and trickery and exploitation. You may want him to make an exception in your own case to let you off this one time, but you know at bottom that unless God really and unalterably detests that sort of behavior, then he cannot be good. On the other hand, we know that if an absolutely good God exists, he must hate most of what we do. We're making ourselves enemies to that goodness every day and are not in the least likely to do any better tomorrow. And so our case is hopeless. Some people talk as if meeting the gaze of absolute goodness would be fun. They need to think again. What the Bible is saying and what C.S. Lewis is saying is God's love does not erase or trump or overpower his judgment and justice and holiness. Rather, it fuels it. The covenant can't be restored by wishful thinking or a general idea of niceness. There has to be repentance. There has to be real change. Both parties have to be faithful to the marriage vow in order for it to work. So how do we actually accomplish that? In verse 8 of chapter 11, there's a radical shift in tone. God's compassion is aroused. He's thinking in his jealous anger. He's mulling over the impending doom, the destruction that he's pronounced over Jerusalem. He's picturing it in his mind. He has the divorce papers in hand. Israel has been served. And maybe you're sitting here thinking back to the story that we started off with, and if you were in that situation, you would be thinking about time. Good riddance. If this was me, I would have been rid of such a wife a long time ago. And you know what? You would have every right to feel that way. It would be totally justified. Just sign on the dotted line and be done with it. And yet, if you really think that that would be your response in that kind of situation, as painful as it is to be rejected again and again so thoroughly, I don't think you fully understand love. Because the Bible also tells us that love hopes all things. God's compassion boils up at the thought of destroying Israel, and he says, how can I give you over even though you deserve this? How can I go through with strict justice and actually carry it out? He talks about Admah and Zeboim. They were sister cities, lesser known cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, overthrown, cities of the plain, totally erased in the judgment by fire that fell onto those two more famous cities. Totally erased on the face of the earth. And God says, how can I make Jerusalem like that? How can I give her over to the destroyer? How can I completely destroy my people? I love her. He changes his mind. And yet, he's God. He can't change his mind. So we've got a paradox here. How can God maintain both his love and his justice? And how can they both be true? How can he give his people what we deserve for our constant wandering and at the same time love us with an unfailing love? He can divert his wrath to a substitute. That's what we see in chapter 3, verse 5. Afterwards, the children of Israel will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and they shall come in fear to the Lord and to his goodness in the latter days. There are promises. There's forward looking in these verses. This is why it's prophetic, why it's talking about Jesus. In the latter days, that church age, that final eschatological, that just means last times, that final time when God fulfills his plan, when he fulfills all of his promises. Hosea is saying, David is going to come. That's not David himself, right? David has been dead for hundreds of years at this point, but the greater better David, the one that David was a symbol of, David's heir, the one true king over God's people, the one true bridegroom of God's people, will come and will actually accomplish this turning back of the heart of his bride in a way that none of that discipline ever could. He is going to be a bridegroom who is so utterly faithful in himself that his faithfulness will actually overflow and pour over and will actually atone for the unfaithfulness of his bride. He breaks the cycle. He wins her faithfulness. He will actually achieve the heart change that nothing else could. He's the one who bears any cost to buy back his bride. He goes under God's wrath. Back to chapter 11. God does not execute his burning anger. He doesn't destroy Ephraim because he executes his burning anger and destroys his son, Jesus Christ. Flipping over just for a moment to Isaiah 53, a passage that should be familiar to you. We read, "And they made his grave with the wicked and with the rich man in his death, although he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will," or other translations say it pleased the Lord, "to crush him and to put him to grief," or to make his life a guilt offering. "When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring, and he shall prolong his days, and the will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand, and out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities." God's compassion does not allow him to ignore his holiness, but he can bear the punishment himself. He can absorb the cost in love. The true bridegroom, in infinite love, buys back his bride at the cost of his own life. Not just dying as a human being, but God himself, who is the source of all life that exists, subjects himself to death for love's sake. And then notice the effect that this has on Israel and has on Gomer in these verses. Finally, there is actual, real change where nothing worked before. Now, when David comes, Israel gets a new heart. The experience of this kind of radical faithfulness and sacrifice and undeserved love, even in the face of scorn, changes us. The obliteration of sin in the death and resurrection of Jesus transforms us. The children of Israel turn. Verse 10 says they seek the Lord. They go after him instead of their idols. They pursue their husband instead of their other lovers. They come trembling. There's an idea of reverence and awe and holy fear there, but you could also translate that word as quickly. The idea is more of an excited leaping coming. So it's trembling in that sense, that you're falling over yourself because you're just running after God so quickly. My people will come quickly to me in the last days. Christ actually gets new hearts for us. God himself gives us new hearts so that we can know his completely undeserved love. There's restoration of fellowship with Yahweh. There's a restoration of that marriage relationship, a restoration of all the blessings that flow from being united to him, the same blessings that we once attributed to Baal and said, yeah, Baal gave me these raisin cakes. God gives you that and so much more. The marriage vows are restored. Faithful love forever and ever. God says, I'll be faithful when you won't. I will chase you to the bitter end when you turn away. I will love you when you hate me, and I will be your husband, because that is what I promised to do. That is what I covenanted to do. So just come home. And we who are sitting here today, who know him, who've had our hearts transformed through knowing him, well, we're waiting for the day, not when he'll come the first time, but we're waiting for the day when our true bridegroom will come a second time to take, not sinful, rebellious people, but to take his perfect, transformed, holy, spotless bride, his church, to actually be with him face to face forever and ever. True faithfulness, sinless love. And so as we go through Advent, as we go through these next few weeks leading up to Christmas, looking back at who it was that came that first time 2,000 years ago, we're also waiting for the one that we know is coming again to take us to be with him. And he is our true bridegroom. So let's return to him. Let's pray. Mighty, merciful Father, when we look at our lives, we know beyond any doubt that we are truly, as you say, just like Gomer. We are just like unfaithful Israel. We turn our backs on you again and again, in spite of all you have ever done is love us. And yet, God, where we were just addicted to raisin cakes and foolishly exchanging your love for lies, you have been faithful to your promises to the very end, even to the point of death. And you have won new hearts for us so that we don't have to be hopelessly trapped in our addictions and the idols of our hearts, but we can have new hearts that will be faithful to you because you are faithful enough for both of us. Lord, let us know you in that way. Let us come trembling now, today, to our King, to our husband, to our lover. Show your faithfulness to us and let that mercy draw us to you so that we will be where you are forever. We praise you and we worship you. In Christ's name.